The walls are alive with carvings of gods and kings, their stories etched in stone. But the real tale lies in the sarcophagus before you, sealed since a teenage pharaoh took his final breath. You're not just looking at a mummy. You're staring into the heart of a tragedy that stretches across millennia. Welcome to WTF History, where we dive into the wild, weird, whose obsession with divine purity turned their palaces into genetic prisons. This isn't a story of golden treasures or divine glory. It's a horror show written in DNA. And we're about to walk through 3,000 years of royal mistakes together. You're standing in ancient Egypt, where the Nile River breathes life into a civilization that's mastered engineering, mathematics, and art in ways that still leave us in awe. The pyramids pierce the desert sky. Hieroglyphs weave epic tales. And the pharaohs? They're not just kings. They're living gods, their word law. They're blood sacred. But here's the twist that makes your jaw drop. Their quest to keep that bloodline pure led to a genetic disaster that makes modern horror films look tame. These rulers believed their divine essence was too precious to mix with mere mortals. So they married their siblings, brothers to sisters, generation after generation. They thought they were preserving godhood. Instead, they were brewing a toxic cocktail of genetic flaws that would haunt their descendants for centuries. Imagine a young pharaoh, barely 16, limping through his golden palace, clutching a walking stick to steady his trembling frame. His spine is twisted, his jaw misaligned, and every breath is a battle against a body that betrays him. The palace servants whisper about a curse, their eyes darting away when he passes, but no one dares speak the truth. This boy is a victim of his family's choices. His parents were siblings. His grandparents were siblings. Go back far enough, and the pattern repeats like a broken record of royal arrogance. This wasn't a one-off mistake. It was a deliberate system, rooted in the belief that the blood of the gods must stay uncontaminated. Priests nodded in approval, advisors calculated political gains, and no one thought about the children who'd pay the price. Let's rewind to the dawn of Egyptian civilization, around 3100 BCE, when the first pharaohs unified the land under their rule. These early rulers didn't set out to destroy themselves. They thought they were building something eternal. The logic was simple but deadly. If you're a god king, descended from Ra himself, how could you possibly marry a commoner? The answer seemed obvious. You marry your sister, you're equal in divinity. It's not just a marriage. It's a sacred act to keep the divine bloodline pure and the gods happy. Picture the first pharaoh who made this choice, standing on his palace balcony, looking out over his kingdom. He sees farmers and craftsmen, ordinary people, and feels a shiver of disgust at the idea of mixing his sacred essence with theirs. His priests agree, his court celebrates, and the tradition takes root. But here's where it gets messy. The ancient Egyptians didn't know about genetics. DNA was millennia away from discovery. They couldn't see the invisible damage piling up with each sibling marriage. In the beginning, the effects were subtle. A royal child might have a slightly crooked jaw or an unusual facial feature. The priests called it a mark of divine favor, proof the gods blessed the union. But over generations, those small quirks snowballed into something far worse. Think of it like pouring poison into a well one drop at a time. The first few drops might not kill you, but keep adding them, and the water becomes deadly. That's what happened to Egypt's royal bloodlines. In the Old Kingdom, around 2600 BCE, sibling marriages were already happening, though not as widespread as they'd later become. But they still had some diversity. Pharaohs sometimes married nobles or foreign princesses, bringing fresh blood into the mix. This kept things stable for a while. The mummies from these early dynasties show fewer signs of genetic damage, with stronger bones and longer lifespans. Egypt was thriving, building pyramids that still stand today, and the royal families seemed to dodge the worst of their own traditions. But power breeds arrogance. As Egypt grew stronger, so did the belief that the pharaoh's blood was too sacred to share. Priests spun tales of gods like Osiris and Isis, siblings and spouses, as proof this was the natural order. Royal children grew up in a world where marrying their sibling wasn't just normal, it was their duty. Imagine being a princess, raised to believe your only purpose is to marry your brother and bear his children, all to keep the gods happy. The psychological weight of that expectation is hard to fathom. As centuries passed, the practice became more entrenched, setting the stage for one of the most haunting figures in Egyptian history, Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh. His story takes us deeper into the heart of this genetic nightmare, where divine ambition and human suffering collide in ways that will leave you speechless. We're now in 1353 BCE, standing in a palace overlooking the Nile, where a boy named Akhenaten is born into a world that worships him as a god, but can't hide the truth of his broken body. This isn't just any pharaoh's story. It's a tale of a man whose very existence challenged Egypt's ideals. Akhenaten wasn't just a ruler. He's known as the heretic king. He was a boy trapped in a body that screamed of genetic damage, a living testament to what happens when inbreeding spirals out of control. Akhenaten was likely the product of sibling incest, as were his parents and their parents before them. The 18th dynasty had been doubling down on inbreeding for generations, and Akhenaten was the result, a walking contradiction of divine claims. Imagine growing up in a palace where everyone calls you a god, but your reflection in a polished bronze mirror tells a different story. His skull was elongated, stretched like something alien. His hips were wide, his chest developed breasts, and his proportions were so unusual that even loyal servants couldn't help but stare before quickly looking away. This wasn't the image of a god-king carved on temple walls. This was a man whose body defied the very myths he was meant to embody. His childhood must have been a strange mix of privilege and pain. Surrounded by luxury, he was also isolated, kept away from other children to hide his deformities. The palace was a stage where everyone played their part in pretending the future pharaoh was perfect. Priests spun stories about his unusual features being signs of divine favor. Courtiers whispered carefully worded praises. But Akhenaten wasn't blind. He knew something was wrong, even if he lacked the words to explain it. Every awkward step, every glance he caught in a servant's eyes, must have been a reminder that he didn't fit the mold of the god-kings before him. When he became pharaoh, Akhenaten did something no ruler before him had dared. He told his artists to stop lying. For centuries, Egyptian art had idealized pharaohs as strong, flawless gods. Akhenaten said, "Enough." He ordered his sculptors and painters to depict him and his family as they truly were: elongated skulls, protruding bellies, and all. The result is some of the most haunting art in history. If you've seen those statues from his reign, with their strange, almost otherworldly proportions, you might have thought it was just an artistic choice. It wasn't. It was reality, a raw, unfiltered documentation of a family ravaged by inbreeding. Akhenaten married Nefertiti, one of history's most iconic queens, and together they had 6 daughters. Court records hint at sons who didn't survive infancy, their tiny bodies crushed by the same genetic burden that plagued their father. The daughters who lived carried the same eerie features: long heads, fragile frames, and a frailty that made daily life a struggle. Palace artists painted them as divine beauties, but behind the scenes, servants whispered about princesses who hid from the sun and struggled with simple tasks. Imagine Nefertiti, celebrated as a goddess, watching her children inherit the same flaws she saw in her husband, knowing there was no escape from the family curse. What drove Akhenaten to break with tradition? Maybe a new god would show mercy. He moved the capital to a new city, Amarna, built in the middle of the desert, far from the traditional power centers of Thebes and Memphis. It was as if he was trying to start over, to create a world where his family's deformities could be reframed as divine perfection. But no new city or new god could fix the damage in his DNA. Amarna became a monument to royal isolation. The royal family lived in a bubble, surrounded by art that celebrated their strangeness while pretending it was sacred. The sculptures from this period are like a genetic diary, showing a family that looked almost alien. Akhenaten's daughters, with their long necks and delicate frames, stare out from reliefs with an eerie beauty. But beauty didn't mean health. These were children who likely struggled to walk, to breathe, to survive. The move to Amarna didn't save them. It just hid them from the rest of Egypt. Akhenaten died young, like so many men in his family. His religious revolution died with him. But the genetic damage he carried lived on, passed to the next generation, to a boy who would become Egypt's most famous pharaoh, not for his deeds, but for the tragedy of his short life and the treasures of his tomb. We're stepping into the shadow of one of history's most iconic figures, a boy whose name echoes through time, Tutankhamun. His story is the heartbreaking climax of the 18th dynasty's genetic nightmare, a tale of a child born into a golden cage, his every breath a battle against the curse of his ancestors. Tutankhamun was born around 1341 BCE, likely the son of Akhenaten and one of his sisters, a product of the same sibling incest that had shaped his father. From a moment he entered the world, he carried a heavy burden. His left foot was turned inward, a clubfoot in modern terms, making every step a painful ordeal. His spine curved abnormally, turning the golden throne into a seat of concealed agony. His chest was malformed, making breathing in Egypt's desert heat a constant struggle. Imagine being 9 years old, worshipped as a living god, but needing a walking stick to cross a room. That was Tutankhamun's reality. The palace was a theater of illusions, where servants were trained to look past the boy king's frailties, bowing and chanting praises while discreetly positioning supports to keep him upright during ceremonies. Priests sang of his divine strength, but everyone could see the truth. This was a child whose body was failing him. Over 130 walking sticks were later found in his tomb, some simple canes, others ornate golden staffs, all serving the same purpose: to help a crippled pharaoh maintain the facade of godhood. Partly to hide his condition, his wife, Enkhesenemen, was his half-sister, carrying the same genetic flaws. Their marriage was a continuation of the royal tradition, but it was also a genetic dead end. Their attempts to have children ended in heartbreak, miscarriages, and stillbirths, with tiny mummies buried alongside their father as silent proof of their failure. Picture the psychological toll on a teenage king, surrounded by temple walls covered in images of strong, perfect pharaohs, knowing he could never measure up. His mirror showed a broken body, while the art around him promised divinity. Court artists faced an impossible task. How do you make a genetic catastrophe look divine? They sidestepped the problem by abandoning realism. Tutankhamun's official portraits are stylized, showing a flawless young god king who bore little resemblance to the real boy. Meanwhile, palace physicians meticulously documented his condition. creating what we now recognize as the world's first detailed study of inbreeding's effects. They noted his bone deformities, his frequent illnesses, his inability to heal from minor injuries. They didn't understand genetics, but they saw the pattern, a pattern their religious beliefs blinded them to. At 19, Tutankhamun's body gave out. A simple case of malaria, something a healthy person might have survived, overwhelmed his compromised immune system. As he lay dying in his palace, fever burning through him, did he understand what his physicians couldn't? Did he see the connection between his suffering and the royal tradition of sibling marriage? We'll never know. He was buried quickly, his tomb sealed. His name largely forgotten until Howard Carter opened it in 1922. That discovery made Tutankhamun a global icon, but it also revealed the truth his court had hidden. The golden mask that covers his face is beautiful, but it hides a story of pain. A boy worshipped as a god, but betrayed by his own DNA. His death should have been a wake-up call, reaching its most extreme form in the dynasty that would close out Egypt's story as an independent kingdom. We're leaping forward to the final act of Egypt's genetic tragedy, the Ptolemaic dynasty, a family that turned inbreeding into an art form and paid the ultimate price. It's 323 BCE, and Egypt is no longer the independent powerhouse it once was. Alexander the Great has conquered it, and when he dies, his general Ptolemy I takes the throne. These are foreigners, Macedonian Greeks, who see themselves as superior to the Egyptians they rule. But they're also savvy politicians. They know their subjects expect their pharaohs to follow the old traditions, including the sacred practice of sibling marriage. So Ptolemy I looks at the temple walls, sees the stories of divine pharaohs marrying their sisters, and decides to adopt the custom. It's a catastrophic decision, one that will echo through his dynasty for centuries, creating a family tree that's less a tree and more a tangled knot. Imagine growing up in a palace where you know, from childhood, that you'll marry your sibling. You play together, share secrets. These weren't distant arranged marriages. They were intimate family bonds twisted into political and reproductive obligations. By the time Cleopatra is born in 69 BCE, the Ptolemaic bloodline is a genetic mess. Her family tree is a nightmare of repetition. Siblings marrying siblings, cousins doubling as parents, names looping endlessly. The founder, Ptolemy I, married his sister. Their son married his sister. Their children did the same, over and over, for 250 years. By Cleopatra's time, the royal family was so intermingled that members were simultaneously siblings, cousins, parents, and children to each other. It's like a genetic house of cards, ready to collapse. Cleopatra is often remembered as a ravishing beauty, a seductress who charmed Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. But that's likely a myth spun by Roman propaganda and Hollywood glamour. After 250 years of inbreeding, Cleopatra probably looked more like her ancestors. Pronounced facial features, possible jaw deformities, and physical frailties that royal artists worked hard to conceal. What made her extraordinary wasn't her appearance, but her mind. She spoke 9 languages, mastered mathematics, and philosophy. Cleopatra's relationships with Caesar and Antony weren't just political alliances. They were genetic lifelines. By having children with these Roman leaders, she was trying to break the cycle of inbreeding that had poisoned her family. Her children, especially Caesar Ion, her son with Julius Caesar, represented a chance for fresh blood. Cleopatra's children were systematically eliminated, snuffing out any chance of genetic redemption. In 30 BCE, Cleopatra chose suicide over capture, ending not just her life, but a 250-year experiment in genetic destruction. Her death, possibly by snakebite, was almost merciful compared to the slow poison of her family's DNA. The Ptolemies had come to Egypt as conquerors, but they were conquered by the very traditions they adopted. They thought they were emulating the divine pharaohs of old, but they were repeating a mistake that had already destroyed so many lives. And with that, we step out of the Ptolemaic palaces and into the broader story of what this all means. We've journeyed through 3,000 years of Egyptian history, from the first pharaohs to the fall of Cleopatra, and now it's time to step back and make sense of this wild, heartbreaking saga. The story of Egypt's pharaohs isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a human tragedy played out on a grand scale. These were people who believed they were gods, but their bodies told a different story. Every malformed jaw, every early death, every stillborn child was a reminder that no amount of power or wealth can rewrite the laws of biology. What's chilling is how this wasn't a one-time mistake, but a cycle that repeated across millennia. The Old Kingdom pharaohs dabbled in sibling marriage, laying the groundwork for trouble. The Middle Kingdom brought in foreign blood, giving the royal gene pool a brief reprieve. But by the New Kingdom, with families like Akhenaten's, inbreeding was back with a vengeance. They became obsessed with bloodline purity, and each time, that obsession led to their downfall. Imagine living in one of these palaces, surrounded by gold and servants, but waking up every day in pain. Your spine aches, your jaw makes eating a chore, your chest struggles to pull in air. You're told you're a god. The psychological toll must have been crushing. They saw the pattern. Infants dying, siblings suffering, ancestors with the same strange features. But their culture demanded they keep going, keep marrying, keep producing heirs to carry the curse forward. For royal women, the stakes were even higher. Every pregnancy was a roll of the dice. Would the child be born alive? Would it survive its first year? Would it be so deformed that even the best artists couldn't hide it? Palace records hint at queens who withdrew from public life, broken by repeated miscarriages. Some turned to wine or opium to dull the pain of watching their children die. These women weren't just mothers. They were prisoners of a system that valued political purity over human lives. Modern genetics gives us the answers the ancients never had. When siblings reproduce, their children have a 25% chance of inheriting 2 copies of a harmful recessive gene. In a diverse population, the result? Jaw deformities, weakened immune systems, hormonal imbalances, neurological issues. The list goes on. The art and mummies of ancient Egypt didn't lie. They documented a slow-motion catastrophe. What's heartbreaking is how close Egypt came to escaping this cycle. Periods of foreign marriages brought healthier children and stronger dynasties. Even when it's killing you. The pharaohs weren't stupid. They built pyramids, invented writing, mastered mathematics, but their beliefs blinded them to the truth staring them in the face. Today, their pain became our knowledge, their suffering our wisdom. As we leave these tombs, let's look one last time at Tutankhamun's golden mask. It's not just a symbol of divine kingship. It's a mask hiding a boy who deserved better. If these pharaohs could speak to us, what would they say? Maybe Akhenaten would warn us about the dangers of fanaticism. Maybe Tutankhamun would beg us to prioritize health over tradition. Maybe Cleopatra would tell us to choose love over lineage. Their voices, silenced by time, still echo through their mummies, their art, their tombs. They wanted to be gods, but they became humanity's greatest teachers about the importance of genetic diversity. So what's the takeaway? The Pharaoh's story reminds us to question the traditions we inherit, to value humanity over ideology, and to learn from the past so we don't repeat it. Their golden tombs are beautiful, but they're also graves for a dream that turned into a nightmare. What do you think? Did the Pharaohs' obsession with purity make them victims of their own power? Or was there something else at play? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't let your family tree turn into a family ladder.